degree of civilization in a society can be judged by entering its prisons. Fyodor Dostoevsky. About a year ago, I was watching a movie called Just Mercy, based on the real story of a black man convicted of the murder of a white girl in Alabama in 1988. Although innocent, he was convicted and sentenced to death. But the thing that shocked me the most was that the case was based primarily off of the testimony of an incarcerated felon. I was deeply compelled as someone who strives to pursue a career in criminal law. And as the movie was over and I got up to turn off the TV, the screen went black. I froze, and a single sentence appeared. For every 9 people who have been executed in the United States, 1 person on death row has been proven innocent and released, a shocking rate of error. And I must just stare at that sentence for about 5 minutes or so, in total shock, thinking about what that number meant. 1 in 9. Until I eventually turned off the TV and went and studied for my math test. I did what most would have done, which is to completely forget about it. That is until I saw the flyer for this TEDx talk. And I knew exactly what I wanted to talk about. The reality of false convictions. We often talk about the problems of mass incarceration, but do we often talk about the dozens of thousands of innocent men and women behind bars? My main focus will be the United States, but you'll see that the problems I address are a reality in every Western democracy, which means that the solutions can be applied anywhere, like right here in France. Today, I will explain how the pursuit of justice can actually lead us away from it, because true justice is not only about punishing the guilty, it's about protecting the innocent, and one doesn't need to be at the expense of the other. Today, across America and Western Europe, our prisons and detention facilities are home to more than 2.2 million people. The United States is one of the only democracies to still have the death penalty, and in the next number of years, the number of people on death row is expected to rise dramatically. If our punishments are so extreme and irreversible, we should make sure we do it right. Today, multiple sources, including the National Innocence Project, have conducted studies to conclude that 5% of American prisoners are innocent. That's 1 in 20 inmates. That's 90,000 lives stolen by a flawed justice system. While European margins of error are not nearly as close, there is still one. Thus, we can improve. So why are so many people getting convicted of crimes they didn't commit? 4 reasons come up again and again. First, official misconduct. When prosecutors or investigators cut corners to gather evidence quickly, the focus shifts from truth to simple procedure. This can easily be avoided. Graves versus State is a case that took place in 1992, where Anthony Graves was convicted of the murder of a family of 6 in Central Texas, despite the lack of motive or physical evidence actually tying him to the scene. He was sentenced to death because the prosecutor withheld favorable evidence that would have made his case. Anthony Graves was exonerated more than 18 years later. Second, false confessions. Now, Europe is more fair on this, but in the United States, long, unrecorded interrogations without an attorney, which is a violation of the Constitution, are a very real thing and can 100% lead to pressure to plead guilty. Now, I'm not saying that pleas and things said on the stand can't be trusted, nothing would ever be presented into court, but there is room to improve. Walter Ogrod is a case that took place in 1988, where a 4-year-old girl was found dead in a cardboard box in an apartment in Philadelphia. After 4 years and no leads, 2 investigators decided to take over the case, and these 2 investigators were known for their very high-stakes confessions. They decided to take Walter Ogrod in, a 23-year-old autistic man. They took him in after his 18-hour shift as a bakery driver, and hours later, pressured relentlessly, exhausted, he signed a confession that conflicted with multiple eyewitness accounts. We don't actually know what happened in that interrogation room because it was never recorded. Walter Ogrod was exonerated more than 28 years later. Third, eyewitness testimonies. Now, this is where the story of the movie comes in. How did a man get convicted and sentenced to death based off of one person's testimony? Now, obviously, this was a different time, and race had a very significant role in this case. But still, 70% of cases of exonerated prisoners involve false testimonies. This is a graph showing memory retention after a particularly graphic or traumatic event. Now, as you can see, after just a week, only 25% of what happened is actually remembered. So, what happens when people take the stand months or even years after the crime was actually committed? Eyewitness testimonies are extremely unreliable, and we rely so much on them. Richard Phillips is a man you probably heard of. He was convicted of the murder of Gregory Harris in 1972, and his case was based primarily off the eyewitness testimony of his friend. An eyewitness testimony that was contradicted multiple times. He was exonerated 46 years later. Fourth and final, inadequate defense. Now, whether you're an adult or a teenager, this is probably the first one you thought of, because this is where we all know that justice gets blatantly unjust. The principle that anyone, guilty or innocent, has the right to a free lawyer is essential to keeping a fair justice system. However, it's a fragile principle, because on one side, you have the Harvard graduate, attorney general of the state or even country making 6 figures a year, and on the other side, you have the overworked, underpaid public defender handling hundreds of cases per year. This is where the balance tips. Now, as easy as it would be to just point out massive faults in our justice system and do nothing about it, I have come with solutions, because there are solutions. And you'll see they're not very complex and they're not impossible to understand, because most importantly, they can be applied today. First, what can we do about official misconduct? Reopening cases randomly every year deters prosecutors and defenders from colluding and investigators from cutting corners, as they might get caught in the future. This forces the ultimate respect and following of the law. Second, false confessions. What differentiates our justice system from those of dictatorships is that it is fair. No enhanced interrogation, no threats, fair. And yet, however, in 24 states, interrogations are not required to be recorded. Just like interrogators are allowed to lie, they're allowed to say they have incriminating evidence or incriminating testimonies, even if that's not the case. Banning these practices is essential to keeping that fairness and avoiding excessive pressure on particularly vulnerable or fragile people. Third, eyewitness testimonies. A juror is told one thing when deciding to convict or not to convict. If there is reasonable doubt, you should not convict. DNA evidence should be mandatory to be able to sentence someone to life without parole or to death. There needs to be undeniable, tangible proof to take such irreversible measures. And fourth, inadequate defense. It gets a little harder and more complex here because the issue here is money, and no one wants to spend money. With an estimated 90,000 innocent prisoners in US facilities and an annual cost of $60,000 per prisoner, that's $5.5 billion the United States is spending unnecessarily. With that exact amount of money, the United States could hire 50,000 public defense attorneys making $100,000 a year. That's more than enough to considerably bring the margin of error down. As a democracy, it's key to understand our justice systems are fair at their roots. We don't need to rebuild anything from scratch, we simply need to improve it. Now, whether you're a parent, a teacher, or a high schooler like myself, you're probably thinking, this is way above my pay grade. I'm not president or senator, I can't make or change laws, I can't do anything. And the truth is you can't. No change in the history of humanity has ever been made when someone was working alone. But together, fighting for a common, just cause, we can be heard. Today, I was told to leave my audience with one key statement. One message you could all take home with you. And in my head, I played it out as something so inspiring, so motivating, it would just make you want to burst out the doors of this building and go change the world. However, I know it's unlikely, but I will say this. What is true justice? What does it look like? I don't know. I don't believe anyone knows. because I don't believe it's ever been accomplished. And I'm known to be quite pessimistic, but I do believe we will get there. Because you see, true justice is not just done in courts of law, it's done everywhere. Justice is done in the streets, it's done in speeches, it's done in TEDx talks, it's done in protests, it's done in waking up, it's done in speaking up. True justice is done when we, the youth, advocate for the forgotten, innocent prisoners failed by our flawed systems. When I think back to that sentence, for every 9 people executed, 1 is innocent, I can't just do nothing anymore. Because now I know, and now you know, justice doesn't fail in our courtrooms. It fails in our silence. Thank you.